Welcome to the Daily Objective, day 88 of the war in Israel. Uh, I am joined once again by James Valiant. How's it going, James?
Okay, how are you, Rossi?
I'm good. We don't shy away from controversy here on this channel. We don't shy away from controversial titles for episodes, but I think it's very rare that we have a title for an episode that we could be accused of, of clickbait. I think we back it up when we have a controversial title with controversial content, which, as we've said before, I don't think should be controversial. I think that's the problem with today's culture. You can see it in the fact that it's controversial. Uh, I'm wondering if today is one of those episodes where people might be able to validly accuse us of clickbait, at least in terms of my answer to this question. I don't know your answer, but I will give my answer to the question: Did Israel create Hamas? And my first answer is, who cares? Now, it's a very contextual who cares, because you should care if anybody in Israel actively worked to create Hamas, to aid them. They should be tried. James, you are a legal expert. I am not, and you're not a legal expert on Israeli law, but I am pretty sure they can be tried for treason, which in Israel, by the way, carries the death penalty if you actively helped Hamas. The who cares part is when it comes to right now, there is a war, and you should in the context of war, a phrase that has been controversial on its own right on this channel. In the context of war, the should this matter? Because this is something we've seen not just with Israel and this war. I we're both old enough to remember the Iraq War and the run-up to the Iraq War, and the people arguing against the Iraq War using pictures of Donald Rumsfeld, who during the Iraq War was the defense secretary. Pictures of him with Saddam shaking Saddam Hussein's hand in the 80s. So, you helped create the problem. How dare you now try to solve it? So, in that context, I think we should be talking about what's important right now, and what's important right now is for Israel to actually defeat this monster, whether or not it helped create it. James.
Fully agreed. Fully agreed. And it is a complex answer, really, as you say. There's a lot of context to bring up, but we as objectivists really know the ultimate answer, don't we? We have the methodological tools that can answer the question, who caused Hamas? And of course, individuals are thinking agents. Individuals are the ones responsible. We believe in free will. And if there are examples like the son of the Hamas founder, who can maybe not become an objectivist, but can certainly get a dramatically different perspective on Hamas and Israel. And if the son of a Hamas founder can do that, then it tells you the power of free will and that individuals are responsible for the ideas they adopt, for the thinking they do or do not do, and for the actions they take. For example, whatever you're thinking about it, if you're violent, you take violent steps. Well, now, again, that transcends any question of individual moral fault. As I said the other day, I don't care if the person's completely brainwashed, if they're a 5-year-old child, or what. If they're a physical threat, if they're a physical danger to you, you have the right of self-defense. Now, also as objectivists, we have the theoretical tool. What caused Islamicism, Islamic fanatical hatred? That is to say, the Islamic culture that dominates the Islamic world today? Well, it is their philosophical leaders. It is all of these imams, all of these sheikhs, all of these teachers, stretching all the way back, mind you, to Muhammad. And as objectivists, we can go further than that because we know that all of the monotheistic religions of the West have effectively their roots in Plato. Plato has totally reshaped Abrahamic monotheism into the religions that we have today. The main religions that we have today have been deeply influenced by the ideas of Plato. So you ask me who is ultimately the most responsible, I'm going to say philosophers. The prophet is responsible, Muhammad himself, and all of his subsequent followers who endorsed violence and racism. And before that, it's the philosophers who made metaphysical dualism possible, stretching all the way back to Plato. But that, in effect, now, if we see, for example, a wider difference of opinion in the West on such issues than we do with, and we see more uniformity, lockstep uniformity within the Islamic world, I think that reflects the fact that the Islamic world discourages thinking as such. They're an anti-reason culture. They don't encourage people to think for themselves or to use reason or to fight this mysticism. And so you have a lot more uniformity, lockstep, robotic uniformity, but that in itself is a cultural phenomenon, if you understand. The West encourages individuals to think. The West has some conception of what reason is. The Islamic world does not. This, again, while it mitigates, it does not absolve individuals of their own personal responsibility. I know I use it a lot, but the son of that Hamas founder was able to break through. Maybe he was exposed to Western media more than others were. Maybe he had some slightly different, but again, it doesn't really matter. If you're a threat, I don't care how brainwashed you are, Israel has a right to kill you, period. It doesn't matter what your individual status, moral status is. But if we're asking, did the creation, we could ask ourselves theoretically things like, well, if the creation of Israel hadn't happened, would there be Hamas and Hezbollah? Well, not as organizations at all. But what made that rejection of Israel so violent? It was the pre-existing ideas. If they had had better ideas, they would have said, oh, great. You mean we're going to have a country that respects free speech, where people are going to have more rights than they do in Saudi Arabia? Oh, wonderful. Let's encourage Israel. We Arab Muslims should get behind the creation of Israel in this tiny little sliver of real estate that Israel has. They could have accepted it. They did not. And it was because of their pre-existing racist, collectivist, mystic grounded ideas. So you say, who created Hamas? It's the evil ideology. It's the evil culture that caused them to reject the existence of Israel and peaceful coexistence with Israel from the moment Israel was created. But returning back to square, it still does not absolve individuals of individual responsibility. If you can know better, you have a responsibility to find out. And if you have access to Western media and you're just accepting what other people are telling you just because other people are telling you, that is a moral issue. It's a moral issue in the West when we just swallow whole. Most people don't think for themselves. Most people just simply, whether they're in the West or in Islam, they just accept the culture around them by osmosis because that's the way they were raised. Their parents taught them, what their religion teaches them, what the media encourages, what their peers encourage. They don't think for themselves. They're in effect absorbing it from around them. That's true in the West. That's true in Islam, and maybe more true because Islam has the culture of Islam today has real no concept of reason, of encouraging thinking at all, like there is at least in the West some of. So you say, who created Hamas? Now we get to the fault of the West in the context of this hatred that Israel did not create. In this context of hatred that the West did not create, the Islamic culture, is our failure to respond decisively encouraging it and allowing it. Yeah, there'd be no Hamas and Hezbollah if Israel and America had taken the proper response 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But no, we have not.
Right.
And so to that extent, the United States and Israel have created the problem, but they didn't invent the problem. They have
Yeah.
let it
No.
fester, grow. And so, does the West get the responsibility for Hamas as such? No. On the other hand, do we have the responsibility, leaders in Israel, leaders in America, can we put at their feet? I'm going to name you. I was hesitant at first, but I'm going to name you, Prime Minister Netanyahu. You actually did encourage this. You actually did sanction this. You actually did exchanges for hostages. You actually did things that allowed this to be possible. So, yeah, I'm going to put a lot, as an Israeli or as an American, I'm going to say, yeah, it's our leadership that's failed. We could have done better. Now, are we responsible as such in the West for the phenomenon of jihadism and Islamic madness? No, we are not.
So yeah, on on the fault of Israel, because yeah, did Israel create Hamas? Of course, these ideas were there. They would have been there anyway. The anti-Israel ideas among Arabs in that region were there, or the anti-Jew ideas were there before Israel was created. But the West does this thing where they look at situations, they look at regions where there are enemies, and sometimes these enemies fight each other, and then the West backs one or kind of or has more of an issue with one than the other. Now the PLO was the problem. It was recognized as the problem. Israel, to whatever extent, it kind of didn't fight back against Hamas as it was founded in it was founded in 1987. And maybe in its early years, it wasn't seen as much of a problem because it meant there are two different factions among the Palestinians. And of course, two different factions there are not like two different political parties in the West. That means they kill each other. So to whatever extent that is the case, that is not a good policy. The PLO, you can say the PLO is evil, and you can say Hamas is evil, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is evil. And the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, they used to be more popular than they are now, but they were communist terrorists. So, and the
Yeah,
PLO were fascist terrorists, and
yeah,
still are. And Hamas are Islamic terrorists, and they are all
yeah.
enemies. And Israel should see them all as enemies, just like the U.S. looking at an Iraq-Iran war should say, sorry, both sides are our
Both of you
enemies.
are right.
And I don't know why we have this difficulty in the West, first of all, to name enemies wherever they are, and then if we actually have to fight them as if they were enemies and not as if they were, some element of, friends generally, because that is what we're supposed to think about. The people of Gaza are actually, good people who need our help, and it's just this
See,
fringe movement that is murdering, dedicated to murdering Jews,
an
when of course we know
ideology
it is
is
not.
an ideology, even a religion, is not a genetic thing. It's not an innate idea. It's not built into anyone's brain. Okay, to be a fanatic, that's what the West does. They treat it sort of like an axiom that'll never change. And with their cultural relativism having been taught at university, who are we to judge any other culture? And these people can't help it. That's the way it's inevitably going to be. These people are going to be, mystic racist haters and killers. We just have to accept that and live with it. We also have this horrible pragmatism idea. Nixon went to China in order to, corner Russia. Oh, you're going to make friends with the monster Mao in order to fight the monsters in the Soviet Union. Okay, once you start down that path of commerce, and look at the way America treats Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia can kill journalists. Saudi Arabia can spout whatever hate they want to hate, and yet well, you see, compared to Iran, Saudi Arabia is our friend. Dot 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 dot, and so we end up making ideological and moral compromises, the deepest kind, because we think compromise trained by pragmatism. We think compromise is the way to work. And so there's a whole bunch of bad ideas that underlie the kind of appeasement that the West engages in with these people. But the truth is, it is these ideas that are the responsibility. It's the ideas that are the cause here. But are individuals responsible for the ideas they accept? At the end of the day, they are. At the end of the day, they are. We are in the 21st century. We are in the 21st century where more information is available than ever before. So, yeah, it's Hamas. They didn't have to exist at all in the first place. They could have accepted a peaceful settlement how many times? And how many times have we said on this channel, even if we destroyed Hamas completely tomorrow, would the same sort of fanatical ideology create another, would the Hydra spread another head, sprout another head? Yeah, they would. Some other organization would be founded to do this. It's the ideology that's generating this and pumping out terrorists, by the bucketful. It's the ideas. It's the culture. Ideas are the fundamental cause of history, ladies and gentlemen. There was no need for anti-Israeli hatred, mysticism, collectivism. No, from the start, they could have simply accepted this tiny little state of Israel and said, hey, we could peacefully coexist with them. In fact, we can live in each other. If they had any sanity, they could have had religious freedom themselves and said, hey, we can trade and live in each other's. No, no, no. They've gone down the path of racism and theocracy and savage medieval mysticism. So it's the culture of the Islamic world that's the ultimate cause here. But is there something the West could have and should have done about it? You're darn right. So if there's something that Israel and America, and they surely could have done this time and again, they refuse, they back out until we start taking action, it seems to me, against the Islamic Republic of Iran. This will just keep going on and on and on until we have that kind of moral clarity. So long as Iran can engage in a war with the West, international shipping, the United States, that the United States doesn't recognize, it's a one-sided war. We don't even recognize right now. We're trying our best not to attack the Houthis directly or Iran directly so that we don't escalate. So long as that is the moral position of Western leaders, like the leaders of my country, we're doomed. We're doomed.
Yeah,
It's just
and
it's happening.
of course, destroying Iran completely, would be a big step towards winning this war, the biggest step, though, the most important one. But Israel is barely fighting against all the proxies of Iran that are firing at Israel and at Israel's allies. And you said something like, if we destroy Hamas completely tomorrow, something else will some other Islamic movement will be founded. And but the thing is, Israel is now not even talking about, I mean, they are talking about completely destroying Hamas, but they're talking about it less. And at least as far as some of what we hear, it looks like some elements of Hamas might still be there. They might not be in power. They might not be called Hamas, but they will be the same people. So yeah, we already see this. And again, I'm going to take the blame back to Israel, and specifically to Netanyahu, who has been in power for most of the time since Israel gave the Gaza Strip, ended the so-called occupation of the Gaza Strip, and
Forcibly
the
removed their own peaceful settlers,
yeah,
mind you, to do it.
forcefully removed the settlements, left, took all their troops out and said, "You look, we're doing this," and after this, if they fire one rocket, we have all the international legitimacy to do whatever we want, which is part of Israel's kind of delusion that the world would be on its side if it did what the world supposedly wants it to do. But during this time, whenever there were rockets fired, when there were more rockets, or when three young Israelis were kidnapped and murdered. So Israel went on a few military operations, but destroying Hamas was never the stated goal until this one. And it should have been. It should have been in each one of those operations. It should have been. It should have been before Israel left Gaza, which it
Before
shouldn't have done in
October
the first place.
7th. That lays at the feet of leaders of Israel. That lays at the feet
Exactly.
of leaders of
Yeah.
America. We let it happen, people. And
Yeah.
we encouraged it to happen. We didn't take out the threat when it was a clear threat. We've been fostering and appeasing them. It's disgusting what the West has been doing. We've been talking about UNRWA and the United Nations, but it's not just the United Nations. There's all kinds of money that comes from the West, from America and Europe, that has been feeding the Palestinians, both on the West Bank and in Gaza, for quite some time now.
Yeah.
Just today, in America's leading newspapers, both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal had articles saying, "Well, it's unrealistic. The goal of completely wiping out Hamas is now being seen more and more by American and Israeli leaders as perhaps an unrealistic goal."
Yeah, and
Whoa.
by the way, it should not have been the goal in the first place. It was an easy goal to name, but the goal should have been to defeat the enemy. And to defeat the enemy, you need to identify the enemy. And the enemy here is, again, the Palestinians. It should have been the Palestinians should be defeated. The Palestinian culture and way of life have to be a thing of the past, because this is fully in line with that culture. I want
When we
to
went to
thank,
war against when we went to war against the Nazis, we said we're at war with Germany. When we went to war against the Emperor of Japan, we said we were at war with Japan. We
yeah.
need that same kind of moral clarity.
Yeah, and there was no humanitarian aid. The,
Can
the the
you
German
imagine?
tanks, the German tanks and planes were not fueled by the people the Germans shot at. So
Can
yeah,
you
this is
imagine, like I've said, can you imagine FDR telling Churchill, "We won't send you aid to help your fight against the Nazis until you provide humanitarian aid to the German people"? I mean, that is so bizarre and perverse. And this is the first time in history, it seems to me, we're engaged in that kind of perverse, shoot yourself in the foot before you go to war kind of thinking. And you're not
yeah,
even
which is
going
why
to war.
So big part of not a big part, it's the only part of why we do what we do. We are not we are not hoping that anybody in Gaza will watch this. I mean, individuals might be convinced, but we're not thinking of cultural change in Gaza or in the West Bank. Maybe Iran, because in Iran we do actually have people who,
Is
when we fight them, they will be on our side. But generally, we are hoping that the West realizes its moral superiority and acts accordingly. And we are doing that very much with the
Well,
help of our
the
of our.
persuasion part, when Britain and America occupied West Germany after World War II, or when the United States occupied Japan after World War II, something, the changing of the hearts and minds part didn't even begin until we had utterly smashed and defeated them, crushed them psychologically, killed a whole bunch of them, made it clear to them that we weren't going to put up with this anymore. And
Yeah, by
until
the
and
way,
unless that happened,
psychological warfare is also something we're going to talk about soon. The Palestinians are winning that war
winning hands
very
down.
decisively.
Yeah,
Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel says, I think of the fundamental cause of Hamas being the Muslim Brotherhood, which entered Gaza around the 1930s. Pragmatism adds fuel to the fire and speeds up the process, but that is not the essential. Yes, it's not the essential in creating Hamas. It is the essential in it still existing when a far superior military power, even today, and certainly at the beginning when it should have been crushed,
yeah.
decides not to use their military superiority to do what they have to do because of a long list of excuses and justifications for not doing it again, like fundamentally there, the pretense that again the enemy is one organization rather than the people who made that organization possible and have kept it in power for so long.
Absolutely. Daniel, approximately the cause is correct. But it's a bigger, even a philosophical cause, right? You have to step back. The emergence, the neo mysticism and savagery of the modern Islamic world, just for the last centuries, has been building up to this. The creation of Wahhabism in the 19th century. The ideological roots go really deep here. In an American political journal today, The Hill, one I do not usually agree with, its editorial opinions, had a very interesting article today. It's religious fanaticism. Religious fanaticism, they identified, was the real cause of the problem here. And that is absolutely correct. If you just want to back up and name it conceptually for what it is, it's mysticism. It's mysticism. And like I say, until that culture is shell shocked, psychologically smashed, defeated, crushed, you can't even begin to think that these people are going to change, given the violent, mystical, emotionalist way. I mean, if the Nazis were mystic emotionalists, these people are so only on a cruder level.
Yeah, Frank asks in the super chat a question that's off topic, but one that I've been thinking about. Will Israel be booed at the Paris Summer Olympics? So first of all, we need to see if Israel is actually allowed into the Summer Olympics. There will be, we spoke a couple of weeks ago about Israel, some calls to remove Israel from the Eurovision Song Contest, something that the Americans in our audience are unfortunately or fortunately not familiar with, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, I would be very surprised if there are no calls to remove Israel. I'm also wondering for those football fans or soccer fans out there, there's some chance that Israel will make it to the Euros as well, and that will be interesting. By the way, in sports competitions now, Israeli teams that are playing in European competitions can't host games in Israel for understandable reasons, but they're hosting in Serbia, I think for the most part, at least the team I support, and in front of empty stadiums because you never know who's going to show up. And not just that, there's at least one instance where a Turkish team that was going to play against an Israeli team couldn't host in their own home arena because they couldn't vouch for the security of the players and in Turkey is
Or Israeli
particularly
athletes.
nasty. I don't know if you've seen these stores that have signs like "No Jews allowed" in Turkey. That's a thing now.
Oh
So
yeah, Turkey, anti-Semitism, of course, getting very intense in Turkey these days. Israelis athletes never have, quote, the home field advantage if they're engaged in international competition. But can you imagine the International Olympic Committee having the same complaints and questions about Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran? Why the hell, the whole idea of the Olympics is international peace. It was founded on the idea that nations can get along. The very idea that Iran has ever been allowed, or that the Soviet Union, when they were in existence, was allowed, or Maoist China allowed, or today, what's going on in North Korea or Russia or China or Iran. I mean, but Israel, oh yeah, we got to make a big complaint about Israel, and we're going to try and keep them out of international peace things like the Olympics. But Iran, these monsters over there, will they ever be questioned about their participation?
by the way, since we have gone on this side issue, I will say that Russian teams, at least in football and basketball, have been banned from European competitions, and now we do hear calls to ban Israeli teams like Russian teams have been banned, which is very weird. This is something the left, those on the left who claim to support Ukraine do. They try to tie the Ukrainian cause with the Palestinian cause, which is very weird considering Russia is 100% behind Hamas, and both of them are fighting for tyranny, and both Ukraine and Israel are fighting for freedom.
Hamas and Iranian leaders met with Putin just a few weeks ago in Moscow. Iran is supplying Russia with drones to assist them in their war in Ukraine. Iran is selling oil, billions and billions of dollars worth of oil to China. It's quite clear when they find these weapons, when the IDF finds weapons in God, where do they come from? They come from Iran. They come from
Um,
North Korea.
So we have a last minute super chat. I also see a comment in the chat that says Bibi was against the withdrawal of Gaza. Yeah, I remember Bibi being against the withdrawal of Gaza. Like many things Bibi says, he is right when he talks and he's wrong when he acts. So he was
Talk
against it.
action.
He was against it, but he voted for it in the Knesset because Sharon threatened to fire him, and he made some argument like it's easier to fight from within the government, and then he quit later on. So yeah, and again, he became prime minister. He could have reversed it. He could have said, "We're going back in.
Yeah.
We're gonna free up some space and resettle some of the area." Thank you, Douglas, for the generous super chat. He says Palestinians have proven time and time again they can't live in peace with Israel. It's about time we in the West have that debate to end the Islamic occupation of Israel and give the land back to the Jews who it belongs. I mean, I agree with the first part. I wouldn't define it as the
Uh,
land belonging to the Jews. That's a thing here on this channel. That's what makes us, I think, unique amongst supporters of Israel. This is not about, who was there 2,000 years. Nobody who's there today was there 2,000 years ago.
I don't care what God said to
Yeah.
Abraham 4,000 years ago, okay? Had nothing to do with it. Had nothing to do with what you'll find in Jewish or Christian Bibles, even though that is what motivates a lot of people in the West to support Israel. We do not. It is because Israel respects rights. They are the only nation in the area that even at all respects freedom of speech, individual liberty. And notice too, they're the only representative democracy in the region for real. So yeah, no, the legitimacy of a state depends upon its recognition and attempt to enforce individual rights. And as I am going to say for the thousandth time, in that sense, Israel is really the only legitimate government in the area.
Yeah, and Douglas does say I disagree completely. Yeah, we disagree, but we will continue this debate. Not on this show right now because it is about to end, but we do have the reality show coming up in a minute. We are talking about Israel's surrender to The Hague. So that is coming up in a minute. We are back here tomorrow talking about the anti-Zionism lie, and the lie that anti-Zionism is somehow completely separate from anti-Semitism.
We're going to keep this up, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to
Yeah.
keep the heat up as hot as we can keep it.
Yeah.
So
And if you
this
find
is
this
about
valuable, interesting, even if you disagree completely, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button and share it with other people who disagree so that they can tell us why, and we can continue the conversation. Thank you, James. Thanks, everybody. See you in a minute on the reality show.